Why are some of us always the life of the party, while others would much rather have a quiet night in? Today, we're cracking open the scientific model that gives us a blueprint for the very core of who we are. So, how in the world do scientists even begin to build a model of something as complex and personal as personality? Well, it's definitely not guesswork. It's actually a huge puzzle that took researchers decades to piece together. And the answer gives us an incredible framework for understanding not just ourselves, but everyone around us. All right, let's get into it. Here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why this was such a tough puzzle to solve in the first place. Then we'll reveal the elegant O'Shane blueprint that finally brought some order to the chaos. After that, we're going to do a deep dive into each of the 5 traits. We'll even touch on the big debate about whether personality is set in stone. And finally, we'll see why any of this actually matters in your day-to-day life. For the longest time, trying to nail down personality was honestly a bit of a free-for-all. Psychologists all agreed that traits were key, but nobody could agree on how many there were or what they were. It was like a puzzle with thousands of pieces and no picture on the box. I mean, just look at the contrast. You had some folks, like psychologist Hans Eysenck, who argued there were just 3 fundamental factors. But then you had others, like Raymond Cattell, who came up with a much more complicated model with 16 different factors. So who was right? The field really needed a unified theory, a simpler map that everyone could agree on. And that's exactly what happened. Researchers started taking a different approach. They began analyzing language itself, all the different words we use in everyday life to describe people. And as they sifted through massive amounts of data, a very clear pattern started to emerge. It was a total breakthrough. And the magic number? The number of core traits that kept popping up again and again across different studies, different languages, and different cultures, it was 5. This became known as the Big 5 model. Researchers like Paul Costa, Robert McCrae, and Lewis Goldberg were really the pioneers here. They helped shape this model into something we can all use, and they gave us this super handy acronym to remember it by: OCEAN. That stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Just think of these as the 5 main continents on the map of human personality. Okay, so let's get into the good stuff. What do these 5 letters, OCEAN, actually mean? Let's break down the blueprint trait by trait. First up is O for openness to experience. This trait is all about imagination, creativity, and a willingness to try new things. And it's not just one thing, it's made up of 6 different facets. You've got fantasy or a vivid imagination, aesthetics, which is a deep appreciation for art and beauty, feelings, being in tune with your own emotions, ideas, which is just plain intellectual curiosity, actions, the willingness to try new activities, and finally values, or the readiness to re-examine social and political norms. So you can kind of think of this as a spectrum. On one side, you have people who are super curious, creative, and maybe a little unconventional. They love novelty. On the other end, you have folks who are more comfortable with what they already know. They prefer routine, tradition, and the familiar. Next, we have C for conscientiousness. This is basically your inner planner and rule follower. It's all about self-discipline and impulse control. And again, this trait breaks down into 6 key facets. Things like a sense of competence, a preference for order, a strong sense of dutifulness, that inner drive for achievement striving, a high degree of self-discipline, and deliberation, which means you think before you act. And you can totally see how this plays out in real life, right? People who score high here, they're your super organized, reliable friends who always have a plan. This is why this trait is one of the biggest predictors of success at work and in school. People on the lower end tend to be a bit more spontaneous, maybe a little more flexible, but also more easily distracted. All right, E for extroversion. This is all about how you engage with the world outside your own head. The 6 facets here really paint the picture. You have warmth or friendliness, gregariousness, the love of being in groups, assertiveness, a high activity level, excitement seeking, that craving for a thrill, and a general tendency toward positive emotions. Now this is so important. It's a spectrum. Extroverts get their energy from being around people. They're often talkative and assertive. Introverts, on the other hand, are on the lower end of this scale. They don't dislike people, they just need less social stimulation and more quiet time to recharge their batteries. And of course, a lot of us are ambiverts, falling somewhere in the middle. Moving on to A for agreeableness. This one's all about social harmony and how you get along with others. It's made up of facets like trust in others, straightforwardness or being frank and sincere, altruism, a genuine concern for others, compliance, which is how you tend to react to conflict, modesty, and tender-mindedness, or your level of sympathy. So someone high in agreeableness is probably your friend who's always considerate and helpful, trying to make sure everyone gets along. Someone lower on the scale might be a little more competitive or suspicious and more likely to put their own interests first. It really shapes how we navigate our social world. And finally, N for neuroticism. This is the tendency to experience negative feelings like anxiety, anger, or sadness. Now, sometimes this trait is called by its opposite, emotional stability. The 6 facets here are things like anxiety, anger hostility, depression, self-consciousness, impulsiveness in terms of being unable to control cravings, and vulnerability to stress. So if you score high in neuroticism, you might find yourself feeling emotionally reactive and stressed out by things that others just brush off. In contrast, people low in neuroticism, those who are high in emotional stability, tend to be calm, resilient, and don't get rattled quite so easily. Okay, so we've got this amazing blueprint. But this brings up a really big question, a huge debate in psychology. Are these traits a fixed biological blueprint that locks in our behavior, or are they more like flexible guidelines? This is the absolute core of what's known as the person-situation controversy. It was a debate famously sparked by psychologist Walter Mischel back in the 60s. He basically argued, hey, wait a minute, the situation we're in often matters a lot more than our so-called personality traits. And here's the fascinating answer that emerged from all that debate. Research shows we have high longitudinal stability. That means an extroverted kid is very, very likely to still be an extroverted adult. Our core traits are pretty stable over our lifetime. But we have lower cross-situational stability. That same extrovert who's the life of the party on Saturday might be totally quiet and focused in a business meeting on Monday. So our core personality stays consistent, but our behavior is flexible and adapts to the situation. So why should you care about any of this? Because this blueprint is an incredibly powerful predictor of, well, your life. These 5 traits are strongly correlated with all sorts of major life outcomes. We're talking about everything from what kind of job you'll enjoy to your physical health. For example, tons of research shows that high conscientiousness is linked to living a longer life. This isn't just theory, it has real, tangible impacts. The Big 5 model gives us a map. It's a scientifically backed blueprint of our natural tendencies and inclinations. It doesn't put you in a box or define your destiny, but it does help you understand your own default settings. So the real question is, now that you have a better understanding of the blueprint, what are you going to build with it?